So this website had this beautiful photo on it, and I wanted to go to it so we could talk about this photo. And whoops, let's scroll down here, and it's this. Obviously, that was taken at night, and it's really cool because of the correct exposure or the exposure that they used. They exposed not for the dark places, which would have given you burnt out, overblown lights, but they actually exposed for the lights, right? So you see all the lights are perfectly exposed, and that what happened is they did a long enough exposure that it allowed enough light to get into the scene. So what I'm suspecting, because it doesn't tell me, that they used a low aperture so that they could do a long exposure, and then exposed did a light reading for the lights, spot red for the lights, so that what happened is you get this beautiful glow from the lights, the red and the blue, and you can see detail where normally if you had taken this shot and just shot it straight out, you would have had a lot of black. You wouldn't have seen much detail. Or if you had spot metered for the lights would have been in focus, and this would have been extremely dark. Or if you had exposed for this, then this would have been blown out. Okay. So the right exposure for this was a happy compromise between the two. But in the end, this is where the spot metering was done on this sign. You can see that one was a little overblown, and these are definitely overblown, but they're small, so it doesn't matter. That one is. But the rest of them, it was the right exposure. And you get there by practice. And this had some really good tips in here. I wanted to just quickly go through. It says a sturdy tripod is a must. You do need a tripod. It ends up allowing you to take these long exposures. And I've shown you mine. Some of them come with a bubble level on them. Mine doesn't. I just guess. Just look through the camera and just make sure everything looks level. And then we talked about for night shots, you're going to use manual focus. And here it says use low ISO if possible. And we know that's not always possible, so we have discussed how to deal with that ISO. You definitely want to shoot raw. And under image quality, you can choose what you're going to shoot. And every camera manufacturer has a different extension for its raw file. For Nikon, it is NEF. That's their raw file. Canon is something else. I think it starts with a C. And I actually shoot both. Whoops. I actually shoot both RAW and JPEG, and it's because if you're looking at your files on a computer that doesn't have Photoshop or something that reads RAW, you won't be able to see them. So if you have that JPEG file, you can still look through your files and know, because they'll be named the same thing, that the RAW file is associated with that JPEG. So I actually shoot both, just so I have a RAW file to work with, but also a JPEG to look at. Take test shots. You absolutely positively want to take test shots. I take test shots constantly, no matter what. So this doesn't just apply to night photography. It does apply to all photography, and bracketing as well. So this shows a night scene with different brackets. And if you're working, and here's another, and if you're working in the dark and you can't use, you're on manual and you're using bulb, and how do you know what bracketing is? Use the exposure compensation button. It's that button with the plus and minus symbol. You'll use that. You'll stop it down a whole f-stop, shoot that, set it to 0, shoot that, and stop it up a whole f-stop and shoot that. And it will create, it will create that sequence of different exposures, so you can make sure you get the right shot. You may, like in a city scene like this where it's bright enough, you might be able to shoot aperture priority mode. And here you might be able to work with shutter priority mode. Most of the time though, when it's really dark, you're going to have to work with manual. Oops, and I'm actually going way too nuts here. And that takes us to bulb mode, okay? So bulb is when it's a setting that you use. The longest shutter speed on most cameras is about 30 seconds. So if you, I think mine may do a minute. But if you want to do more than that, you have to go to bulb mode. Now, on some cameras, they have a B, that's bulb mode. But on most cameras, you go to manual, and you scroll through your shutter speeds until you get to bulb. And basically what happens is it leaves it open. And you will hold it with a shutter release, cable release, and count. And so you need some sort of device to count. Like that, a shutter release. And you hold it and you count, or you use a watch to count. And then when you're done, you let it go. And that's how you create really cool images like you see in here. Back to this here. So bulb mode overrides any automatic functions set by the camera. And so you really want to practice. Since you're going to be using the shutter or opening the shutter for more than 30 seconds, you want to select a larger f-stop like f8. And so for exposures that last a few minutes. Now, that's not always accurate. I tend to start with f8 as a default. And I'll show you what I do. I go and do research. So what I'll do is, if I know that I'm going to do a long exposure, I'm going to look up exposure for photographing lightning bugs or fireflies. And someone will tell you where to start. There you go, right there. So basically, this is what I did when I shot mine. I started right there. f2.8 at 15 seconds, ISO 200. Now, I ended up shooting something completely different than that, but it was a starting place. It got me to where I needed to start. Because when you're in the dark, when you're trying to focus in the dark, it's tough. But yeah, see, he even says you can use that as a starting point. And these are the kind of exposures he got. This is what happened if he did a 10-minute exposure. Right? And then he talks about what he did. So there's always somebody somewhere on the internet that will have told you what to do. And for the extremely long exposures, you can use the lowest ISO on your camera, but we have learned how to work with that if you can't. Most people don't know how to work with that. So they tell you that high ISO automatically means high noise, and it doesn't necessarily if you know what to do. Okay. And then this one, they just, with the bulb mode, they just went and danced around with a flashlight at dark while it was on. And you just practice. You just do a bunch of practice shots until eventually you get the right shot. And what else? I was going to tell you something else. Of course, it just escaped me. Oh, focusing. So when you're trying to focus in the dark, what you want to do is turn your dial all the way to infinity, and then just twist it just a little bit back to in the opposite direction. Okay, so this is infinity. Okay, so on this image,
good grammar and spelling are important, but if you
okay, so this is infinity, right? Infinity sign. And this is the focal point. So what you'll do is in this case, this Nikon, you'll turn the camera all the way to the right so that the infinity is aligned with the focus. You can't turn any further. Just turn it to the right. And then slightly turn it back just a smidge so that you're a little bit off. And as long as you're working with a large, like f4, f8 or higher, as long as you're working with one of those large apertures, everything will be in focus and you'll be fine. The reason you don't want to go all the way to infinity is because it goes really, sometimes you'll have stuff in the foreground that'll be out of focus. So if you just turn it back just a little bit, this one is just a little bit to the right. Other cameras, you might have to turn it a little bit to the left. It depends on which way you rotate it. You just want to turn it all the way to infinity and then move it back in the opposite direction. And that, in the dark, is how you can make sure you've got it focused. To be double sure, go in and check to make sure in your mirror, your window, go in and check that manually to make sure it's in focus there too. Okay. So I will stop this here and we'll continue in the next video.